Holocaust survivors, rabbis, dignitaries, colleagues and friends. It is an honor for me to join you from Johannesburg this Yom HaShoah and share with you some of my reflections about monuments and memory of the Holocaust. As we near 80 years after the end of the Holocaust, where the words "never again" were used for the first time, Auschwitz survivor and author Primo Levi's warning is critical for us to reflect on. He said, "It happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen, and it can happen everywhere." This is actually such an important warning, and this is the core of what we at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center believe in. And Levy's cautionary phrase is prominently displayed in our center. This Yom HaShoah, let me start with a personal connection and reflection. I'm not only a director and founder of a Holocaust museum, but I'm also a daughter of a Holocaust survivor. My father, Moses Turner, survived this camp, the Plaszow concentration camp near Krakow in Poland. He did that together with his brother, Henrik Turner, and together they were rescued by Oskar Schindler. They went on his famous list. The rest of the family was murdered, including my grandmother, Leah Turner, who I do not have a picture of, and my aunts, my father's sisters, Hela and Zila Turner. They were all murdered in the Belzec killing center in the east of nowadays Poland. But of course, I'm here because my father and my uncle survived. And I'm here to tell you their story and the lessons I learned from their story. Our family visited the Belzec memorial site and were honored to be invited to the opening of the new memorial and museum in June 2004. And I'll speak a little bit about that site and its importance later. But my father's story does not end there. In November of 2021, the local community of the town where my father came from, Nowy Targ in southwest Poland, opened a very moving memorial. Organizing this memorial was a special individual. His name is Dariusz Popila. He is actually an Olympian sportsman, a canoeist that won gold medal. And he organized a civil society organization called People, Not Numbers. And they record and memorialize villages and towns in southwest Poland. His team researched and established a memorial in the Jewish cemetery where 2,900 names of all those murdered in the town are marked, including the names of my grandmother and my aunts. So why am I telling you this? Because this is such an inspiring story of how memory and memorials of the Holocaust can be created actually in many sites all around the world, small and big, sites of atrocities and removed from it, and can be created by so many different entities. My father's legacy did not end with his family or indeed with my family. It played a huge role in me founding the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. And in a way, it is his legacy. It is the legacy of my family that did not survive, and also those that did. And this is their legacy, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. So as we reflect on trying to make sense of the Holocaust through museums and memorials, I would like you to reflect with me. Think of Holocaust museums or memorials you visited in the past. What made it an effective museum or memorial, in your opinion? Professor Michael Berenbaum, a friend and mentor, tells us that the place from which you remember an event and the time when you tell its history shapes how it is being remembered. He reminds us that a Holocaust museum or memorial needs to answer 4 questions. What history do you tell? Where do you tell this history? With what do you have to tell it? And how will you tell this history? He also reminds us that we live in transitional times. The presence of survivors is moving, sadly, from being in our lived memory to one of historical memory. We are all aware that in some years, 10, maybe more, no survivors, not even baby survivors, will be with us. So I would like us to reflect on different memorials and museums together and remember that a museum or memorial to the Holocaust is a space where the visitor explores very difficult histories. And I'm showing you Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is a site of pain, a site of the Holocaust, but also a site of a museum and a site of memory. And I invite us all to explore what is the role of a memorial or museum in reflecting on difficult histories of the Holocaust. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we tell this history? How do we represent all this complex history, painful history, difficult history in a museum or in a memorial? We will need to ask ourselves, what do we include, but what do we not include? And in doing so, do we marginalize any of those histories? Now that there are thousands, of course, of museums and memorials around the world, from those established immediately after the end of the Second World War to the many who were established just recently, even the one that you are opening now in Las Vegas. Those memorials and museums were established in many different places and in many different scenarios, in concentration camps themselves, in sites of suffering, but also sites removed from that suffering, in different times and by different entities. Those memorials and museums tell many, many stories. So let us look at a few examples of museums and memorials from around the world and their role in the recognition of past wrongs, in securing public memory of the events through education and commemoration, bringing the stories of life, and not only the moment of murder, of death, highlighting names of the victims and giving dignity back to those this dignity was taken so brutally from. So let's start with Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau, of course, a complex of camps, When you visit Auschwitz I, where there was the concentration camp and where the museum is now located, where the artifacts of the victims are located, where the stories are told. And then Auschwitz-Birkenau, Auschwitz III, where the place of suffering, the place of murder occurred, but where very few panels, very few descriptions, very few objects are present. The story told in this specific place is a story of the place, but it cannot be told without a historical context of the Holocaust beyond Auschwitz, not only about Auschwitz. This site was established already by survivors in 1947, very early on. Also, this site has national exhibitions. And of course, for those of you that visited, the one opened and developed by Yad Vashem in Block 27 in Auschwitz I is very, very moving. But there's also a new Roma exhibition in one of the blocks. And in Block 17, just in the last few months, an Austrian exhibition was opened. Auschwitz was visited by 2.5 million visitors in 2019 before the pandemic, and became a site of tourism and dark tourism. I do not have time to reflect on that further and would like to move on to the site that I mentioned before, the Belzec Memorial and Museum that I told you I attended together with my family in June of 2004. This is a mass murder site, but this new memorial, this new museum is very moving. It marks mass graves of the 500,000 men, women, and children that were murdered in this death camp or killing center. But it also tells the context of the Holocaust through its museum. It is very, very moving. Of course, the very well-known museum, important museum in Yad Vashem, that opened to the public in 1957, and then with a new museum, new building, cutting through the mountain, that opened in 2005, designed by a renowned architect, Moshe Safdie, that includes many exhibitions, the main historical exhibition, but also very moving memorials to the children, to the righteous amongst the nations, to the communities that were lost, to art, to the art of the Holocaust, and so much more. All those stories of women, children, the righteous, communities, history, anti-Semitism, archive, and so much more. And we will speak a little bit about that. Of course, the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, designed by Eisenman in Berlin and opened in 2005, is a museum that you can speak about for hours, because some absolutely find it unbelievable and says it all through its blocks, cemetery-like, in such a large space in the center of Berlin. What is really important is the information center under it, because that information center, despite its size, it is small, is an excellent exhibition, in my opinion. It gives context, it brings emotions, it brings a timeline, victims' narratives, documenting voices and letters and documents, and it tells us the perpetrators' history through the sites of perpetration. It brings us the names of victims, and it talks about memory and memorial. So for me, this is a very, very strong memorial. But of course, in Berlin, you have numerous memorials that tell different stories, small and large, all around Berlin. Memorials and museums have a very, very important role to play. The latest 2001 museum survey shows that museums are a highly trusted source of information, with history museums are actually at over 78% trust. Now, in a world where there is an assault on truth, an assault on history, where nationalism, where populism is growing, this is an important role for museums and memorials to remember and honor and use wisely. So let me take the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, which I created, as a case study, a quick case study, to look at how then do you remember? How then do you create a museum? First of all, let me just tell you that our center is a private public institute established with the city of Johannesburg and officially opened in March 2019. So we are relatively new. We explore the history of genocides in the 20th century, and we look at connections between genocide and contemporary human rights violations in South Africa. We also aim to increase awareness to discrimination based on race, gender, disabilities, or othering. The center tells the story of the Holocaust through many lenses. We look at the lens of victims and survivors, but also through the stories of bystanders, rescuers, resistors, collaborators, and yes, also perpetrators. We present it through the voices, the dilemmas, and the choices of those people I mentioned. We encourage the visitors to engage with photographs, with artifacts, with drawings, testimonies, and so much more in their own pace, their own choice. So the exhibition is more interactive, it's more thematic, and visitors are engaging with it in different ways. We attempt to promote active citizenship by utilizing the arts to concentrate on the life the victims led before their murder, and not only on their suffering and their moment of death. The exhibition includes art, poetry, and music in all its spaces. And it brings many such experiences, including, for example, survivors singing and telling their testimonies in our garden of reflection. Please feel free to go to our website and listen to that music and explore our exhibition further. We also need to ask ourselves, what more do we do to remember the Holocaust, to understand the Holocaust in today's world? What are our opportunities? What are our challenges? Because the challenges exist, and they include, of course, the passing of the survivors, the witnesses of the atrocities who played an important role in sharing their painful memories with students and still playing such an important role, active role in the education programs of so many museums, and may they live until 120. This is so important, but we need to think about the way forward. Our role in society is to pay attention and listen to the stories and warnings of the survivors we meet. Of course, Holocaust survivor, the late Elie Wiesel said, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. And the witnesses who we listened to for so many years are now the ones asking us to pay it forward. Our exhibition ends with these two survivors, Irene Klaas, a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto, and Sylvester Sendakieye, a genocide survivor from Rwanda who survived only with two brothers in one of the churches. And they say to each other, I thought that when the world learned what had happened to us, it could never happen again. But it did, Irene says. And of course, Sylvester says, and a genocide happened yet again to us here in Rwanda, in full view of the world. They tell us that we need to learn from history. I do hope that we all do. It is in our hands. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you this Yom HaShoah.